I always believed loyalty meant something. That putting in the years, the sweat, the sacrifice, it would all amount to something in the end. Turns out, I was wrong. It happened on a night that should have been a celebration. My mother's 60th birthday, a grand affair in our family estate. The dining hall was packed with relatives, business partners, old family friends. I had spent the afternoon making sure everything was perfect, because that's what I did. I handled things. I ran things. For over a decade, I had dedicated my life to the family business, growing it, modernizing it, making it thrive. When I first joined, it had been a struggling enterprise, barely breaking even. My father, a traditionalist through and through, had always resisted change. It was me who had pushed us into the digital age, streamlined our operations, built lasting relationships with high-value clients. So when my father stood up for his toast, I expected the usual, a few heartfelt words, maybe a thank you for organizing the event. What I didn't expect was for him to take the microphone, clear his throat, and say, "As I look toward retirement, I've decided it's time for a fresh start. Someone young, someone with new ideas to take this company to the next level. That's why I'm proud to announce that my successor as CEO will be my grandson, Nathan." The applause was deafening. People cheered, raised their glasses. I couldn't move. Nathan? My nephew, barely out of college, with a degree he had barely earned and no experience running so much as a lemonade stand? The same Nathan who had spent his summers jet-setting through Europe while I was handling late-night client calls, managing crises, keeping the business afloat? I felt my stomach twist. I glanced at my mother, who was beaming with pride. My sister, Nathan's mother, smiled smugly as if this had been the plan all along. My father looked straight ahead, not even sparing me a glance. 12 years. 12 years of my life, gone in an instant. I forced myself to stay seated, to smile, to nod at the congratulations being thrown around. My wife, seated next to me, reached for my hand under the table. I barely felt her fingers. The rest of the night was a blur. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I didn't even speak unless spoken to. I felt like a ghost, drifting through my own life. The people around me laughed and danced, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. When the guests finally trickled out and the house fell silent, I found my father alone in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey. I shut the door behind me. "Tell me this is a joke?" He sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It's not a joke, son. Nathan is the future of this company." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Nathan has never worked a single day in his life. He has fresh ideas," my father countered. "He's young. He has a degree. I built this company," I said through clenched teeth. "I saved it from bankruptcy. I expanded our market. I made it what it is today. And we appreciate that." My father's voice was maddeningly calm. "But this is about the next generation. You've had your time." "My time?" I stepped closer, hands shaking. "My time?" My father's gaze hardened. "I need you to respect my decision. Nathan is family. So what am I?" My voice cracked despite myself. "What the hell am I, Dad?" Silence. I let out a shuddering breath. My fists clenched at my sides. "I won't do this. I won't work under Nathan." "You'll mentor him," my father said, as if that was some kind of compromise. "Show him the ropes. He'll need guidance." "No." I turned and walked out of the study. I didn't sleep that night. My wife held me, whispering that we'd figure things out, that I wasn't alone, that she was proud of me. But I didn't feel like a man worth being proud of. The next morning, I walked into the office for what I knew would be the last time. I cleaned out my desk, ignoring the shocked faces of my colleagues. I handed in my resignation. My father didn't try to stop me. By the time I left, stepping out into the bright, indifferent world, I knew I had just burned the only bridge I had ever known. I had no plan, no backup, just 12 wasted years and nothing to show for it. The days after my resignation felt like free-falling through a black void. For 12 years, my life had been a routine. Meetings, deadlines, deals, crises. I had been indispensable. Now, I woke up to silence. No early morning calls, no urgent emails, no fires to put out. At first, I told myself it was a blessing. I had time to breathe, to think. But thinking was dangerous. It led me down dark paths. Memories of the nights I had stayed late at the office while my father enjoyed his retirement in all but name. The holidays I had missed. The times I had convinced myself that all of it was leading to something, that someday my work would be acknowledged. That had been a lie. I tried to distract myself, spending more time with my wife, catching up with old friends I hadn't seen in years. But everywhere I went, people wanted to talk about the business. How does it feel to finally have a break? One friend asked. I bet it's nice to get some time off, another joked. I smiled, nodded, pretended I wasn't suffocating. Then, 2 weeks after I walked away, the first cracks began to show. It started with a phone call from a former colleague. Hey, I know you probably don't want to hear about this, he said hesitantly, but things are getting bad over here. I sat up. Bad how? Morale's in the toilet. Nathan's making decisions. Bad ones. He fired some of the senior staff, the ones who actually know what they're doing. Said they weren't aligned with his vision. I clenched my jaw. That's not even the worst part, he continued. He's been changing the way we handle contracts, slashing long-term deals, trying to push new, high-risk investments. Clients are getting nervous. I shut my eyes. I had built relationships with those clients, earned their trust. Now Nathan was gambling with everything I had worked for. That night, I told myself it wasn't my problem. The next day, I heard from a second person. By the end of the week, I had a dozen messages from people still in the company. People who wanted to vent. People who wanted advice. People who were, for the first time, realizing what I had always known. Nathan was in way over his head. Then came the news that changed everything. A client, one of our biggest, pulled out of a multi-million-dollar contract. The deal had been years in the making, something I had personally fought for. And just like that, it was gone. I saw it in the local business papers. The headlines weren't subtle. Trouble at Langston & Co. Shifts in leadership raise concerns. I stared at the article for a long time. And then, I did something I never thought I'd do. I picked up my phone and called an old friend in the industry. I need a meeting, I said. That was the moment I decided. If they had cast me out, I would build something of my own. And I would make sure they regretted every single decision that led them to this point. I spent the next week making calls. I reached out to former clients, old business contacts, anyone I had built relationships with over the years. I wasn't even entirely sure what I was looking for. Reassurance, opportunity, maybe just proof that my work had actually meant something. The response was overwhelming. One by one, the clients I had personally handled expressed the same frustration. They didn't trust Nathan. They didn't understand the direction the company was heading. Some had already started looking for alternatives. Others were simply waiting for the next disaster to hit. You're telling me you're out of it for good? One longtime client asked. Because if you're starting something new, I'd rather take my business to you. I hadn't been expecting that. That night, I sat in the kitchen with my wife. A dozen handwritten notes spread out across the table. Names, numbers, offers. I think I have something here, I admitted. Something real. She nodded, sipping her tea. Then do it. It's not that simple, I muttered. Starting from scratch? It's going to take everything I have. What if it doesn't work? She reached across the table, taking my hand. And what if it does? I exhaled. She had a point. By the time I went to bed that night, I had already started sketching out the foundation of a new business. I knew the industry inside and out. I knew what clients wanted. I knew what mistakes to avoid. And most importantly, I knew what it felt like to be underestimated. I wasn't going to let that happen again. A month after my father handed Nathan the company, I quietly registered a new business. It wasn't flashy, not yet, but it was mine. At first, I worked out of my home office. It was strange, operating without a massive team, without an executive suite, without an assistant keeping track of my schedule. But it was also freeing. I hired a skeleton crew, just a handful of former employees who had either left the company in protest or had been pushed out by Nathan's incompetence. One of them, my former operations manager, shook my hand firmly when he walked into my home office for the first time. I can't tell you how good it feels to be working under someone who actually knows what they're doing, he said. It was a small team, but it was the right team. And within weeks, we landed our first major contract. It wasn't a massive deal, not by corporate standards, but it was a sign that people trusted me, that they were willing to follow me. I kept my head down, focused on the work, and ignored the headlines that kept cropping up about my father's company. Until one day, a friend sent me a link. Langston & Co. CEO under fire for questionable business practices. I hesitated before clicking, but curiosity won. The article detailed everything I had already heard: Nathan's reckless spending, his disastrous restructuring of our most valuable contracts, the increasing dissatisfaction from investors. But it also revealed something new. There were whispers of financial discrepancies, of numbers that didn't add up. And just like that, I knew exactly where this was heading. Nathan hadn't just been bad at running the company. He had been dishonest. I sat back in my chair, letting that sink in. The fall was coming, and I was going to watch it happen. The downfall wasn't immediate. It never is. At first, my father and Nathan tried to control the narrative. They sent out press releases insisting everything was fine, that the company was adjusting to a new era, that Nathan was a visionary making bold, strategic decisions for the future. But the numbers didn't lie. Investors started backing out. Key employees, some of the best I had personally trained, walked away. Clients lost faith. And then, the audits began. I didn't have access to the full details, but I knew what was coming. Financial fraud allegations weren't easy to sweep under the rug. The moment those whispers turned into formal investigations, the clock started ticking. Still, I didn't reach out. I had spent too many years cleaning up other people's messes. I had worked too hard to build something of my own. Then, late one evening, my phone rang. It was my father. I let it ring. The second time, I ignored it again. The third time, my wife gave me a look. Just see what he wants. I sighed and answered. What? There was a long pause. Then, quietly, we need to talk. I almost laughed. Now you want to talk? I made a mistake. His voice was stiff, like the words physically hurt to say. I see that now. It took everything in me not to lash out, not to throw every betrayal, every insult, every dismissal back in his face. But I had spent too long being angry. It wasn't worth it anymore. What do you want? I asked. We're in trouble, he admitted. Nathan, a pause, a deep breath. He wasn't ready for this. No kidding. I need you to come back. That made me laugh. A real, bitter laugh. You need me to fix your mess, I corrected. Again. Silence. I exhaled, rubbing my temple. You think you can just snap your fingers and I'll drop everything? I know I handled things wrong, he said quickly. I know I should have. No, I interrupted. You don't get to rewrite history. You didn't just handle things wrong. You threw me away. You made it clear I wasn't good enough for you. And now, suddenly, I am? He didn't respond. I shook my head. You made your choice. You live with it. You don't understand. No, you don't understand, I snapped. I have a business. A real one. One I built, without you. More silence. Then, you won't even consider it? His voice had shifted, less desperate, more resigned. Not for a second. I hung up. For the first time in months, I felt light. Like I had finally let go. Like I had finally won. 2 weeks after that phone call, I heard the news. Langston & Company was collapsing. Not struggling. Not experiencing a period of adjustment. Full on. No recovery. Burning to the ground, collapsing. Nathan had dug the grave. My father had let him. And now, they were both standing at the edge, watching as everything crumbled. The fraud investigation had officially escalated into legal action. Several major clients had filed lawsuits. Investors were pulling the last of their funds. And employees, those who hadn't already jumped ship, were looking for a way out. My company, on the other hand, was thriving. In the past month, I had doubled my staff. My new office space was buzzing with energy, filled with people who actually believed in the work we were doing. We weren't just surviving. We were growing, expanding, winning. And that's when the unexpected happened. One evening, as I was locking up, I spotted someone standing by the office entrance. For a second, I thought I was imagining things. But no, it was Nathan. He looked different, hollowed out, like the weight of the world had finally settled on his shoulders. He wasn't the cocky, arrogant kid from before. He was desperate. I should have walked away. I should have ignored him, the same way he had ignored me all those months ago. But curiosity won. I leaned against the doorway. You lost, Nathan? He swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. I exhaled slowly, already knowing where this was going. If you're looking for a job, I don't hire frauds. His face twisted, but he didn't lash out. That was new. I messed up, he admitted. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I thought I could do this, but I couldn't. I ruined everything. I said nothing. He looked down, scuffing his shoe against the pavement. I don't know what to do, he muttered. I don't have anywhere else to go. And there it was. I waited, letting the silence stretch, letting him feel every ounce of what he had done. After a long moment, I said, You're right. You don't know what to do. And you sure as hell don't have anywhere to go. He flinched. But that's not my problem, I added. Not anymore. I turned, stepping back inside. And just before I shut the door, I heard him whisper, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Some things didn't need an answer. The final collapse of Langston and Company came faster than I expected. Within weeks, the company was officially in freefall. Lawsuits piled up, major contracts defaulted, and the board, once firmly under my father's control, turned on him. They were looking for a way out, a way to salvage whatever was left. But by then, there was nothing worth saving. And just like that, the business my father had built, the one I had spent 12 years holding together, was gone. The news should have felt satisfying. It should have made me feel vindicated. But mostly, I just felt nothing. Nathan disappeared from the public eye after our conversation outside my office. I didn't hear from him again, and I didn't ask around. As for my father, the last thing I heard was that he was trying to cut a deal, offering to sell off whatever scraps of the company remained to avoid total ruin. But it was too late. And then, one evening, as I was going over financials in my office, my receptionist knocked on the door. You have a visitor, she said, hesitating. It's your father. I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling before glancing up. Send him in. A moment later, he stepped inside. He looked old, older than I'd ever seen him. The confident businessman, the man who had built an empire from the ground up, was gone. In his place was a man who had lost everything. He didn't sit. He just stood there, shifting uncomfortably. I know you don't want to see me, he said, but I needed to come. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Why? He sighed heavily, glancing around the office. I wanted to see what you built. I didn't respond. Finally, he met my eyes. You were right, he admitted. About everything. I waited. I let my pride blind me, he continued. I thought I was making the right decision. I thought Nathan, he stopped himself, shaking his head. I was a fool. I tilted my head slightly. And now that you've lost everything, you suddenly understand? He flinched. A long silence stretched between us. Then, quietly, he said, I know I can't undo what I did to you. I know I can't fix it, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. It was the first time in my entire life that my father had ever apologized to me. For a long moment, I just looked at him, unsure of what to say. And then, finally, I nodded. He seemed to take that as enough. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. Just as he reached it, he paused. You did good, son. And then he left. I sat there for a long time after he was gone, staring at the empty doorway. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt done. I had spent so much of my life chasing my father's approval, fighting for a place in a company that had never truly been mine. But now, I realized, I didn't need his validation. I had built something better, something mine. And for the first time, that was enough. 6 months after Langston and Company officially shut its doors, I stood in my new office, looking out over the city skyline. I had done it. Not just survived. Not just moved on. I had built something from nothing, something stronger, something real. My company was thriving, growing faster than I ever expected. Clients had flocked to us after my father's business collapsed. eager for stability, for leadership they could trust. I had hired more employees, some from Langston and Company, others fresh talent ready to prove themselves. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I was my own man. The past still lingered, of course. I heard occasional updates from mutual acquaintances. My father had taken a step back from the business world entirely. My sister, once Nathan's biggest supporter, was furious about how everything had turned out but had conveniently washed her hands of the situation. And Nathan? No one knew. Some said he had moved overseas to find himself. Others claimed he was still in the city, drifting aimlessly from job to job. But I didn't care. His story wasn't my concern anymore. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a meeting, my receptionist knocked on the door. "There's a woman here to see you," she said. "She won't say what it's about." I frowned. "Who is it?" She hesitated. "Your mother." I stared at her for a long moment before exhaling. "Send her in." A minute later, my mother stepped inside. She looked nervous, wringing her hands, her eyes darting around the office. "It's nice," she murmured. "You've done well." I said nothing. Finally, she sat down across from me, hesitating before speaking. I just wanted to see you," she admitted. "Your father told me about the conversation you two had. He told me you're doing good." I leaned back in my chair, waiting. "I know you won't forgive me," she continued, voice tight. "I know I failed you. I should have fought for you. I should have seen what was happening. But I didn't, and I lost you because of it." I exhaled slowly. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You did." Tears welled in her eyes. "I miss you." For the first time in a long time, I felt something other than anger when I looked at her. She was still my mother, and part of me would always love her. But I had learned something through all of this. Love wasn't enough. "You made your choices," I said finally, "and I made mine." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you," she whispered. "That's all." She stood, hesitating for just a moment before turning toward the door. And this time, I didn't stop her, because I didn't need her approval. Not anymore. After she left, I turned back to the window, looking out over the city. My city. My future. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing someone else's dreams. I was building my own, and I wasn't looking back.